Hello and welcome to the fifth part in my series on how to read movies. In this episode we're going to look at something radically different from anything we've looked at before. Up till now I've been focusing on how edited shots are planned and structured in order to make meaning and emotion. But what if your movie is one of those that has hardly any editing at all? What if it's one of those films that uses long tracking shots? There are many famous examples of this in films. Check these out if you don't know them. The spectacular opening shot of Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, the celebrated Steadicam shot into the Copacabana Club in Scorsese's Goodfellas, and one of my favourites, the football stadium scene in Campanelli's The Secret in Their Eyes. There are even films which have only one shot for their entire duration, either faked for technical reasons like Hitchcock's Rope, or genuine one-shot wonders like Alexander Sokurov's Russian Ark or Sebastian Schipper's Victoria. But we're not going to look at any of those. Instead, I'm delighted to introduce the work of a very talented young Chinese director called Bi Gan. So far he's made 2 feature films, both of which have a long tracking shot taking up most of the second half. In the case of his second film, Long Day's Journey into Night, the unedited shot lasts a whole hour. And in the film we're going to look at today, his first film, Kaili Blues, the tracking shot comes in a bit under that, at 41 minutes. Kaili City is a subtropical town in the southwestern province of Guizhou, and a centre for the culture of the Miao people, whom director Bi Gan himself hails from. His movie tells the story of doctor and poet Chen, who takes a journey to a village in the interior. He's going to rescue his nephew, who is at risk of being sold by his criminal father. That's actually a massive oversimplification, as the plot has a number of overlapping threads which interrelate in really interesting ways, as we will see. By the way, there's a link to watch Kaili Blues in the description of this video. The film begins with a motto from the Buddhist text, the Diamond Sutra. Taking this quotation as a cue, the film drifts between past, present and future, and sleep and wakefulness, so that as the long tracking shot progresses, it increasingly seems like a mythical dream sequence, rather than a straightforward depiction of reality. The director of Kaili Blues was hugely influenced by Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker, where the protagonists enter an area called The Zone, a place where your innermost desires can be realised. It's worth bearing that in mind when we come to the floating world of the tracking shot. Tarkovsky's film is based on the Strugatsky brothers' novel Roadside Picnic, and in Kaili Blues this is actually the title of central character Chen's poetry collection, which we see early on in the movie. It was also a working title for the film. So what happens to moving images' ability to communicate when the standard 3 shots aren't there? I mean, shot, reverse shot, and the general view, the objective camera shot. So, halfway through the movie, Chen arrives on the train near to the village where he aims to find his nephew. And there the tracking shot begins with a simple long shot of a motorcycle stand, and the first scene of an interlocking subplot. Yang needs a lift into town to go to work and also to attend a pop concert, but her wannabe boyfriend's bike won't start. So, indifferent to his desire to take her, she grabs another ride, and the love-struck motor taxi driver is obliged to give Chen a lift instead. The tracking shot then becomes a virtuosic winding odyssey to the town, on motorbike, on a truck, on a boat, and on foot across a bridge, following first one character and then another. See here how the camera takes on a life of its own, leaving the characters to take a precipitous shortcut, sort of acting as a character in the drama in its own right. And here the same thing, where the camera sort of decides to leave Yang's place of work and goes in search of another character. According to the director, they made 3 takes of the tracking shot with 3 different cameras, choosing this one because it had a more graduated automatic exposure setting. This shot introduces the woman who will soon give a haircut to Chen, receive a symbolic gift from him, and has a mysterious resemblance to his dead wife. So I asked, what happens to film language when you've got no editing, when you haven't got the usual 3 angles to cut between? We've already observed the strange subjectivity of the camera, taking paths of its own around the village. Another interesting feature of Began's continuous take is the lack of close-ups. That's by no means a necessary corollary of long tracking shots. It's perfectly possible to shoot close during them. The 3-minute opening shot of Wells' Touch of Evil actually starts with a close-up, and in Sebastian Schipper's Victoria it is more like the default shot size. So here this is an aesthetic decision by the director, making Kaili Blues closer to what film theorists used to call primitive cinema, those early silent movies which filmed a theatrical scene in long shot from a fixed angle. Except that in this case, of course, the camera is in constant motion. The close-up is usually considered to be an essential expressive element of film language, the most obvious feature which separates cinema from theatre. But what's interesting is that in Kaili Blues, we don't feel any less connection with the characters and their stories because the movie is shot wide. Here is a rare close-up, appropriately, as Yang Yang reflects wistfully on the passing train, which will take her out of the village to a new life in the big city. The symbolism of the train resonates through the film as one of its repeated motifs, and brings us to the second part of this analysis. One of the challenges of this movie is the first hour, where you have to have the patience to let it happen to you, but at the same time pay careful attention to the pieces in the narrative jigsaw which come at you with minimal announcement. One of the extraordinary aspects of Kaili Blues is the way that motifs recur throughout the film, kind of like a mosaic, creating evocative echoes across the drama. These repeated motifs are very varied in their nature. There are big themes like dead or lost sons. There are 2 alcoholic characters called Pisshead, played by the same actor. There are clocks and watches, locks and lock-picking, trains, mythic wild men, a traditional musical instrument called the lusheng, a disco ball associated with Chen's dead wife, shoes in water evoking his mother, bananas, dolphins, windmills. Let's look very briefly at just 3 of those motifs. You'll notice I put the timecode in the frame so that you know where in the film it occurs. In the description there's also a link to a document which lists all of the different motifs and where they appear. Near the beginning of the film we see one of those disco mirror balls hanging in Chen's nephew Wei Wei's home. This kind of old-fashioned object is now desirably retro in the area of East London where I live. Catching sight of the mirror ball provokes in Chen a fleeting memory of his now deceased wife. Later on we see this scene again, now extended, but with his wife still out of focus. The request for him to sing is important, something he only delivers on years later, during the long tracking shot, when he visits the village. Finally, right at the end of the film comes another memory of his wife, at home with him, with the disco ball in the background. The first time where we see her in focus, and we realise she has this uncanny resemblance to the hairdresser in the village. Motifs aren't necessarily just images, they could be sounds or part of a dialogue. For instance, the idea of windmills first appears in one of Chen's poems, which we hear at the beginning of the tracking shot. Then Yang Yang buys a toy windmill to take to the pop concert in town. It soon breaks, and the motorcyclist, who loves her, fixes it and presents it to her as a gift. An essential unit in any story is the transaction, in this case the giving of a gift. And what we see in this scene is the giving of no less than 3 gifts. Here the narrative echoes happen in a kind of layering all at the same time. The young man gives the windmill to Yang Yang. She reciprocates with a charm to stop his bike engine from dying. And Chen remembers he's brought a mixtape from his colleague to give to her ex, and, as this guy has recently died, he gives it instead to the woman who looks curiously like his own dead wife. Are you confused yet? It's actually a lot more complicated than that, and explains why it's necessary to see this film more than once. But the overall effect is so smooth and seamless, literally in the case of the tracking shot, that that's a very easy thing to do. Director Began himself said that his approach to the film was anthropological rather than cinematographical. So let's introduce a bit of theory. The renowned structural anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss developed the concept of the mytheme, a semantic unit that echoes across the narrative, creating a network of associations that cross-cut the line of the story. He said that we should analyse myths by identifying these semantic echoes and grouping them into packets of related meaning. He also said that myths are a machine for the suppression of time, where repetition becomes a central feature. When we look at the role of repetition in different art forms, we can see that it's rare in films, but in music it's completely normal, and in poetry it's common, and in novels it's really not allowed at all. Now recall the opening motto from the Diamond Sutra about the ephemeral nature of time, and we can see that this temporal blurring or cross-cutting is exactly what is happening in Kaili Blues. So bearing that in mind, let's finish by looking at one more repeated motif. Throughout the film there are repeated references to the mythic hairy wild man, a kind of Chinese Bigfoot, and a classically mythic monster figure. At the beginning of the film, the drunkard, Pisshead, thinks it's hilarious to scare Chen's nephew Wei Wei with stories of the wild man. Wei Wei complains about terrifying tales on the TV to his negligent barfly father. And then there's a news story on the radio. A flashback to 9 years earlier, when Chen has just been released from prison, contains the report on that earlier wild man. It turns out that this was the accident that killed Chen's colleague's son. Then right at the end of the tracking shot, the motorcyclist gives this advice to Chen. Remember that the name of the child nephew who Chen's come to rescue is Wei Wei. And here, with a cut around to Chen, the long tracking shot ends, and his bubble of dreamtime bursts, as he realises the adult motorcyclist is the young nephew he has come to rescue. but in the future. So we can see how through repetitions and cross-references the normal trajectory of time is continually put into flux in this remarkable film. If you enjoyed this, please click like on the video, that helps with the algorithms, make a comment and I promise to respond if you do, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much.